Good evening, dear listener, and welcome. You have found something rather special tonight. Perhaps you stumbled upon this while seeking rest, or maybe the algorithm, in its mysterious wisdom, has delivered you here at precisely the moment you needed a place of quiet refuge. Whatever path has brought you to this doorstep, I want you to know that you are welcome here. What you are about to hear is the beginning of a story, though perhaps story is not quite the right word. It is, more accurately, a collection of memories. Pages from a leather-bound journal kept by an innkeeper who lived and worked in a remote place, far from the bustle of cities and the clamor of crowded streets. The inn sat at the edge of the frontier, where the well-worn roads began to thin into footpaths, and where the footpaths eventually surrendered entirely to forest, to meadow, to mountain. It was a place where travelers paused to gather their courage before venturing into the unknown, or where they collapsed with relief upon returning from it. The innkeeper whose words you will hear tonight kept a diary for many, many years. Each night, after the last candle had been snuffed in the common room and the fire had been banked to embers, they would climb the narrow stairs to a small chamber beneath the eaves, light a single tallow candle, and write. They wrote about the travelers who passed through. They wrote about the changing of seasons, the peculiar moods of the weather, the small mysteries that seemed to gather in the corners of that old building like cobwebs. They wrote about loneliness and about unexpected kinship. They wrote, I think, because they understood that every person who crossed their threshold carried a story worth remembering, even if that story was never fully told. We do not know the innkeeper's true name. The journal itself offers only a single initial on the first page, faded now to illegibility. But their voice remains clear across the centuries, preserved in ink that has barely faded, in handwriting that flows with the steadiness of someone accustomed to long nights and quiet contemplation. Tonight, we begin at the beginning, as all good journeys must. We begin with the founding of the inn, with the first heavy snowfall of a winter-long past, and with the travelers who sought shelter from the cold. We begin, in other words, with the first entry in a diary that would span decades. So settle in, wherever you are. Let the world outside grow distant. Imagine, if you will, the crackle of a fire, the smell of wood smoke, the way candlelight makes shadows dance upon rough-hewn walls. Imagine the wind pressing against shuttered windows, and the comforting knowledge that you are warm and dry and safe. Now let us turn the page together and listen to the innkeeper speak.
The 23rd day of November in the year of our settlement's 12th winter, I have decided to begin a journal. This may seem a strange thing to record this decision itself, but I find that I want there to be some accounting of the life lived within these walls. The inn has stood now for 3 years, and in that time I have watched perhaps 1,000 travelers pass through its doors. Some stayed only for a single night. Others lingered for weeks, waiting for weather to clear, or wounds to heal, or courage to return. Each of them left something behind, though not always something visible, a feeling perhaps, an impression. The faint residue of their presence that seems to settle into the wood and stone of a place, becoming part of its character. I want to remember them. I want to remember the way the light falls through the eastern windows on winter mornings, how it catches the dust motes and makes them glow like tiny embers drifting through the air. I want to remember the particular creak of the third stair, which I have come to think of as the building's way of announcing visitors before they reach the common room. I want to remember the smell of bread baking in the clay oven my father built with his own hands before the fever took him, before I found myself the sole keeper of this place. So I have purchased this journal from a traveling merchant who passed through last month. The leather of its cover is rough but sturdy, dyed a deep brown that reminds me of the bark of the old oak that stands at the crossroads half a mile from here. The pages are thick and cream-colored, and when I run my fingers across them, I can feel the individual fibers of the paper. It is, perhaps, an extravagance. Paper is not cheap here on the frontier, where everything must be carried over mountain passes and through forests that seem to swallow roads whole. But I have saved carefully, and I find that I need this. I need a place to put the words that accumulate inside me during the long, quiet hours of the night. The inn itself requires some description, I think, for any future reader who might come upon these pages. It sits at the junction of two roads, one running roughly north to south, connecting the settlements of the lowlands to the mining camps in the mountains, and one running east to west, linking the old established towns near the coast to the newer homesteads, pushing ever further into the wilderness. This location was my father's wisdom. He understood that travelers need places to rest, and that those places are best situated where paths cross, where decisions must be made about which direction to take. The building is constructed of local timber and stone gathered from the surrounding forest and the rocky outcroppings that jut from the hillsides like the bones of the earth breaking through its skin. My father felled the trees himself, with help from neighbors who understood that an inn would benefit everyone, that it would provide a center around which a community might slowly gather. The walls are thick, designed to hold warmth in winter and keep the worst of the summer heat at bay. The roof is shingled with wooden slats, overlapping like the scales of some great sleeping creature, and beneath them is a layer of birch bark and packed earth that helps insulate against the cold. There are 2 floors. The ground level contains the common room, which is the heart of the inn, and the kitchen, which is its stomach. The common room stretches perhaps 30 feet from end to end, with a massive stone fireplace dominating the wall opposite the main entrance. The hearth is large enough that a grown man could stand within it without stooping, and during the coldest months, I keep a fire burning there from dawn until well past midnight. Above the mantel hangs a rack where I dry herbs and occasionally cure small cuts of meat, and the smoke that rises from the fire gives everything a subtle flavor, a hint of wood and warmth that I have come to associate with comfort itself. The floor of the common room is flagstone, fitted together by my father with a precision that still amazes me. He was a carpenter by trade before he came to this frontier, and he brought that craftsman's eye to everything he built. Between the stones, I have packed sand and dried rushes, which I replace each season and which give the room a pleasant earthy smell. Scattered across this floor are wooden tables and benches, heavy enough that they do not shift easily when a boisterous group grows rowdy, yet smooth enough that they clean without too much effort. I count 6 tables in total of varying sizes, capable of seating perhaps 40 souls if they do not mind pressing close together. The kitchen lies behind the common room, separated by a heavy door that I keep closed when cooking to prevent the smells from overwhelming the guests, or more accurately, to prevent the guests from overwhelming the food before it is ready. Here I have my clay oven, my iron pots and pans, my stores of dried goods, my barrels of ale and cider, my casks of wine, for those rare occasions when a traveler of means comes through. There is a large wooden table where I prepare meals, scarred by years of chopping and kneading, and a window that looks out onto the kitchen garden, though at this time of year the garden sleeps beneath a blanket of frost and soon will sleep beneath snow. The upper floor is reached by a narrow staircase that ascends from one corner of the common room. Here are the sleeping chambers, 8 in total, though they vary considerably in size and appointment. 2 of them are private rooms, small but adequate, with proper beds raised off the floor on wooden frames, with straw mattresses that I restuff each autumn, with wool blankets woven by a woman in the valley who trades her work for lodging when she travels to visit her sister in the settlements to the north. These rooms I reserve for travelers who can afford a higher rate, or for those who are ill or injured and need privacy for their recovery. The remaining 6 rooms are simpler. They contain pallets arranged along the walls, simple straw-stuffed mattresses laid directly on the wooden floorboards, each with a rough woolen blanket folded at its foot. In these rooms, strangers sleep side by side, separated only by the thin membrane of courtesy and exhaustion. It is not ideal, but it is warm, and it is dry. And in the deep of winter, when the alternative is sleeping in the open with only the stars for a roof, it is luxury enough. There is one more room on this upper floor, though it is not available for guests. It is my own chamber, tucked beneath the pitch of the roof, with a ceiling that slopes so steeply I must stoop when I approach the bed. But there's a small window that faces east, and through it I can watch the sun rise over the mountains each morning, painting the peaks in shades of rose and gold. It is in this room that I write now, by the light of a single candle, with my journal open on the small desk my father built for me when I was a child learning my letters. Outside, the wind is rising. I can hear it pressing against the shutters, testing their strength, seeking entry. The temperature has been dropping steadily for days now, and this afternoon I noticed a particular quality to the light, a strange brightness that veterans of this frontier know well. It is the light that precedes the first true snowfall of winter. Tomorrow, I suspect, the world will be transformed. The roads will begin their long disappearance beneath drifts of white. Travelers will face a choice, push forward despite the danger sheer or seek shelter and wait. Many of them will seek shelter here, and so I will have much to write about, I think. The first snow always brings an interesting mix of guests. There are those who planned well, who knew the winter was coming and timed their journey to arrive before the passes become impassable. There are those who planned poorly, who ignored the warnings and now find themselves stranded. And there are those who planned not at all, who live their lives in a state of perpetual motion, following roads wherever they lead, trusting in providence or luck, or the kindness of strangers. I look forward to meeting them all. But for now, the candle grows low, and my hand grows tired. I will close this first entry with a simple observation. It is a strange and wonderful thing to be the keeper of a crossroads. People arrive here carrying the weight of wherever they have been, and they leave carrying the seeds of wherever they are going. And for a brief time between arrival and departure, they rest in this place that I have made warm and welcoming. I am the keeper of their pause, the guardian of their between time. It is a responsibility I do not take lightly. Part 2. The snow arrives the 24th day of November. It has begun. I woke before dawn, as is my habit, and immediately sensed that something had changed. The quality of the silence was different, not the ordinary quiet of early morning, when the world holds its breath before the business of the day begins, but a deeper, more muffled silence, as if the earth itself had been wrapped in wool. Even before I opened the shutters, I knew what I would find. The snow had come. When I pushed the wooden slats aside, the cold hit my face like a physical force, sharp and clean and somehow exhilarating despite its bite. But it was the sight that stole my breath. The world had vanished, or rather, the world I knew had vanished, replaced by something entirely new. Where yesterday there had been brown earth and gray stone and the dull green of lingering moss, now there was only white, endless, perfect, impossibly white. The snow was still falling, though gently, the flakes drifting down with a lazy patience that suggested they had all the time in the world to complete their transformation. Each one was distinct, catching what little light filtered through the clouds, glinting briefly before joining its countless siblings on the ground. Already the drifts had begun to form against the walls of the inn, reaching halfway up the shutters of the common room. The oak at the crossroads, that ancient sentinel that has guided travelers to this place for longer than anyone can remember, stood transformed into something from a folk tale. Its bare branches, laden with snow, bowed beneath the weight of it. I stood at the window for a long time, simply watching. There is something about the first snow of winter that demands witness. It is a death of sorts, the death of the year's long green vitality, but it is also a birth, the arrival of something wholly new. The world does not simply sleep beneath the snow. It becomes an entirely different place, one governed by different rules, one that offers different dangers and different beauties. Eventually, the practical demands of innkeeping pulled me from my reverie. There was wood to be carried, fires to be built, bread to be set rising. The snow might transform the world outside, but inside, the rhythms of hospitality continue unbroken. I made my way down the narrow stairs, feeling the familiar creak of the third step beneath my foot, and found the common room dark and cold. The fire I'd banked the night before reduced to barely glowing embers. I knelt before the hearth and set to work reviving it, laying kindling atop the coals, blowing gently to coax the flame, adding larger pieces of wood as the fire grew. There is a meditation in this task, a sequence of actions I have performed so many times that my body knows them without conscious thought, leaving my mind free to wander. I thought about the travelers who would surely arrive today, driven from the roads by the snow. I thought about the preparations I should make. Extra bedding pulled from storage, additional stores of food brought up from the root cellar, fresh candles to replace those that had burned down. Thought about the conversations that would fill this room by evening, the stories that strangers would share with one another, united by the common experience of being stranded together in a snowstorm. By the time the fire was roaring properly, filling the common room with warmth and the pleasant smell of burning oak, the morning light had strengthened enough to filter through the cracks in the shutters. I opened them one by one, letting in the strange luminosity of a snow-filled day. The light was almost blue, reflected off countless crystals, and it gave the room an otherworldly quality, as if the inn itself had been transported to some realm between waking and dreaming. I set the kettle to boil over the fire and went to the kitchen to begin the bread. The dough from the night before had risen beautifully beneath its cloth covering, puffy and fragrant with the yeast that has been handed down in this settlement from the original founders, a living thing that connects us to all the bread that has been baked before. I punched it down, shaped it into loaves, and set them in the clay oven to bake. The smell that began to fill the kitchen was, I think, one of the finest smells in all the world. Bread baking, warm and yeasty, and somehow full of promise. It was mid-morning when the first travelers arrived. I heard them before I saw them, the stamp of feet on the porch as they knocked the snow from their boots, the murmur of voices, the creak of the door as they pushed it open. I emerged from the kitchen to find 3 figures standing just inside the entrance, cloaked and hooded against the cold, snow dusting their shoulders and the tops of their backs. They were a family, as it turned out. A man and woman, perhaps in their middle years, with a daughter who might have been 15 or 16 winters old. They introduced themselves as the Hardings, traveling from one of the coastal settlements toward the mountains, where the man had family who were homesteading on newly cleared land. They had hoped to reach the mountains before the snow, but the weather had moved faster than anticipated, and they had found themselves caught in a storm overnight, huddled in what shelter they could find beneath a rocky overhang, waiting for dawn. The woman, whose name was Margaret, was pale with cold and exhaustion, and she moved stiffly, as if her joints had frozen in the night and not yet fully thawed. The daughter, called Eliza, was in better condition, the resilience of youth serving her well, but her eyes had a haunted quality that spoke of fear, experienced and not yet forgotten. The man, Thomas, held himself with a stubborn sort of dignity, the posture of someone determined not to show weakness, but I could see the tremor in his hands as he fumbled with the clasp of his cloak. I showed them to the fire immediately, pressing cups of hot tea into their hands, wrapping extra blankets around their shoulders. The inn has a purpose in moments like these, a reason for existing that goes beyond commerce or convenience. These people needed warmth and safety, and I was able to provide both. As they thawed, their story emerged in fragments. They had left the coast 3 weeks ago, traveling light because they hoped to make good time. The autumn had been mild, and they had taken this as a sign that winter would be slow in arriving. But nature makes no promises and keeps no counsel. The cold had come suddenly, sweeping down from the mountains like an invading army, and the snow had followed close behind. The night spent in the open had been the worst of their lives, Thomas admitted quietly. They had found the overhang by luck more than skill, a shallow depression in a rock face that offered minimal shelter from the wind. They had huddled together for warmth, all three of them, and Thomas had stayed awake through the long hours, feeding their small fire with whatever wood he could find beneath the snow, terrified that if he slept, the fire would die, and they would die with it. Margaret had slept fitfully, but Eliza had not slept at all. She sat now by the hearth, her hands wrapped around her cup of tea, staring into the flames with an expression that seemed far older than her years. She had seen something in that long night, I thought. She had glimpsed the thin line between life and death, and the glimpse had changed her. I brought them food, warm bread with butter, a thick stew I had prepared the day before, slices of cured ham. They ate with the single-minded intensity of people who have been hungry and cold and are now blessedly neither. I refilled their cups and replenished their plates, and I asked no questions, understanding that sometimes what people need most is simply to be cared for without demands. It was early afternoon before they were ready to speak more freely. Thomas asked about the roads, and I told him what I knew, that the passes would likely be closed within days, that the snow was expected to continue for at least another day or two, that even if the weather cleared, the accumulation would make travel dangerous, if not impossible, until spring. His face fell at this news, but I could see that it was not entirely unexpected. "We'll need to stay," he said. It was not a question. "You're welcome to stay as long as necessary," I replied. "The inn has room, and we have supplies enough to see us through the winter." Margaret reached out and clasped my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Thank you," she said, and there was a weight to those words that went beyond ordinary gratitude. She understood what I was offering, not just shelter, but something more fundamental, a place to be while the world outside raged and roared, a pause in the midst of chaos. I showed them to one of the private rooms, explaining that they could have it for themselves, that I would not ask them to share with strangers unless the inn became unexpectedly crowded. Margaret wept a little at the sight of the bed, at the clean blankets, at the simple comfort of a space that was theirs alone. Eliza stood in the corner, still silent, still watching the world with those haunted eyes. I left them to rest, returning to the common room to prepare for the other travelers I knew would come. The day was still young, and the snow was still falling, and the roads would drive more strangers to my door before the light failed. I was not wrong. Part 3. The Merchant and the Minstrel. By late afternoon, the common room had begun to fill. After the Hardings, a pair of travelers arrived together, though they had only met that morning on the road. The first was a merchant named Josiah, a round-faced man with a beard that had grown unkempt during his journey, who traveled with a pack horse laden with goods. He dealt in small luxuries, he explained. Ribbons and buttons, needles and thread, small mirrors and combs, perfumes and soaps, the little indulgences that make life on the frontier more bearable. He made his living traveling from settlement to settlement, appearing at each like a visiting dignitary from the civilized world, offering glimpses of elegance to people who lived hard lives. The snow had caught him between destinations, and he had spent the morning trying to navigate drifts that grew deeper with each passing hour. His pack horse, a patient creature named Butternut, had finally refused to go further, planting her hooves in the snow and regarding Josiah with an expression that clearly communicated her opinion of the situation. It was at that moment that he had encountered his traveling companion. The second arrival was a woman named Cora, and she was a minstrel. She carried a lute across her back, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from the weather, and she wore her dark hair in a single long braid that hung nearly to her waist. She had been traveling on foot, following the road that led from the mountains to the coast, seeking audiences wherever she might find them. The snow had not deterred her initially. She claimed to have grown up in a region where winters were far more severe, and she had spoken of this storm with something approaching disdain. But even mountain-born travelers have limits. When she had encountered Josiah and his stubborn horse, she had recognized the wisdom of seeking shelter together. There is safety in numbers, particularly in a snowstorm, where becoming lost or disoriented can mean death. I settled them by the fire with the Hardings, and soon the common room was full of conversation. Josiah, it turned out, was a natural storyteller, the kind of man who had learned that his goods sold better when accompanied by tales of their origin. He told us about the silk ribbons he carried, how they had been woven in a distant city by workers whose families had practiced the craft for generations, how the dye came from a particular kind of beetle found only in certain forests, how the colors had names that translated roughly to sunset over still water and the first green of spring. The ribbons themselves were beautiful, I must admit. He brought them out to show us, laying them across the rough wood of the table, and even in the dim light of the common room, they seemed to glow with an inner radiance. Margaret Harding touched one with a fingertip almost reverently, and I saw something change in her face, a softening, a remembrance perhaps of the woman she had been before the hardships of frontier life had worn her down. Josie noticed this too, and without comment, he folded the ribbon and pressed it into her hand. "A gift," he said, when she tried to protest. "Payment for the company on a cold night." Cora, the minstrel, watched this exchange with bright, observant eyes. She had the look of someone who noticed everything, who collected observations the way Josiah collected goods, storing them away for later use. When Josiah's story wound to a close, she reached for her lute and began to tune it, her fingers moving across the strings with the unconscious competence of long practice. "May I play?" she asked, directing the question to me. "Please," I said. "Music is always welcome here." She played for us then as the afternoon light faded and the snow continued to fall. Her voice was clear and strong with a slight huskiness that gave it depth. And she knew songs that I had never heard before, melodies that seemed to come from very far away. She sang about travelers and the roads they walked, about the comfort of firelight and the longing for home. She sang about love and loss and the strange beauty of winter, about the way the world transforms when snow falls upon it. Eliza Harding, who had remained silent and withdrawn since her arrival, slowly uncurled from her corner by the fire. As Cora sang, something in the girl's face began to change. The haunted look did not vanish entirely, but it softened, giving way to something more like wonder. When Cora finished a particularly beautiful sing about starlight on snow, Eliza spoke for the first time. "That was lovely," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Cora turned to her with a warm smile. "Thank you, child. Music helps, I find. Whatever ails you, music helps." It was not a cure for what Eliza had experienced, for the terror of that night spent in the cold with death pressing close. But it was something, a reminder that beauty still existed, that the world contained more than danger and hardship. I watched the girl relax by degrees, watched her parents exchange glances of relief, and I understood once again why the inn mattered. It was not just shelter from the storm, it was shelter from the weight of the world, a place where people could set down their burdens for a time and simply be. The evening deepened. I prepared supper, a hearty meal of stew and bread and roasted root vegetables from the cellar, and we ate together at the long table nearest the fire. The conversation flowed easily now, strangers becoming something more than strangers through the alchemy of shared warmth and shared food. Thomas Harding told us about his brother's homestead in the mountains, about the land they planned to clear, about the cabin they would build when spring returned. Josiah spoke of the strangest things he had ever sold, including a music box from across the ocean that played a tune no one in this land had ever heard. Cora offered fragments of her own history, hinting at wanderings that had taken her far and wide. Though she deflected questions about where she had come from originally, with practiced ease, I listened more than I spoke. As is my nature, the keeper of an inn learns to be a listener, to create space for others to fill. But I also watched, noting the way the firelight played across their faces, the way their shoulders gradually loosened as the tension of the road drained away, the way their laughter grew easier as the evening wore on. This is what I wanted to remember. This is why I started this journal. Not the great events of history which happen in distant places and reach us here only as rumors and echoes, but these small moments, the communion of strangers around a fire, the gift of a ribbon freely given, the song that brought a frightened girl back to herself. These are the things worth recording. These are the things I do not want to forget. As the evening deepened and the candles burned lower, I found myself studying each of my guests in turn, committing their faces to memory, Josiah, with his round cheeks flushed from the fire's warmth, his eyes bright with the pleasure of an audience. He was a man who fed on company, I realized, who drew energy from the presence of others the way a plant draws nourishment from the sun. The solitary stretches of his merchant's road must weigh heavily on him, I thought, and I understood now why he talked so much, so eagerly. Words were his currency of connection, his way of binding himself to other souls, however briefly. Cora was his opposite in many ways, though no less compelling. Where Josiah filled silences, she inhabited them. Her presence was quiet but intense, like the glow of embers rather than the crackle of flames. When she was not playing, she sat with a stillness that seemed almost unnatural, her dark eyes watchful, missing nothing. I had the sense that she was cataloging everything, storing it away for later use, transforming the raw material of experience into the art she would create. Thomas Harding sat with his arm around his wife, his weathered face soft with a tenderness that spoke of years of devotion. He was a practical man, I could tell, one who measured worth in terms of utility and action. But there was poetry in him too, hidden beneath the calluses and the careful planning. I saw it in the way he looked at Margaret, in the way his hand traced absent patterns on her shoulder. He had brought his family through hardship and danger, and now, in this moment of safety, he allowed himself the luxury of gentleness. Margaret herself had begun to relax in a way I had not seen before. The color had returned to her cheeks, and the tension had drained from her shoulders. She leaned into her husband's embrace with a trust that seemed absolute, and occasionally she reached out to touch Eliza, as if reassuring herself that her daughter was real, was whole, was here. The ribbon Josiah had given her was wrapped around her wrist now, a flash of color against her simple dress, and I caught her glancing at it from time to time with an expression of quiet wonder. And Eliza, young Eliza, who had entered the inn with the haunted eyes of someone who had glimpsed her own mortality. She sat at Cora's feet like a disciple at the feet of a master, her attention fixed on the minstrel's fingers as they moved across the lute strings. There was hunger in her gaze, a desperate desire to learn, to grow, to become something more than the frightened child who had huddled through a freezing night. Music had given her something to cling to, a future to imagine, and I could see her reaching toward it with all the fierce determination of youth. These were my guests. These were the souls who had washed up on the shore of my inn, driven here by the relentless tide of winter. Tomorrow, perhaps, or the day after, new travelers would arrive, bringing new stories, new needs, new opportunities for connection. But tonight, these 5 were my charges, my responsibility, my temporary family. I rose and added more wood to the fire, watching the flames leap up to embrace it. The room was warm, now almost hot, but no one complained. After what the Hardings had endured, after the long, cold journey that had brought Josiah and Cora to this crossroads, the heat was not merely comfortable, but redemptive. It was proof that they had made it, that they were safe, that the world still contained warmth and light. Oh, just... The smell of wood smoke mingled with the lingering aromas of supper, creating a scent that seemed to embody comfort itself. I breathed it in and felt something like contentment settle over me. This, I thought, was what the inn was for. Not just shelter, not just food and drink, but this intangible thing, this feeling of belonging that could spring up between strangers on a winter night. Outside, the wind had picked up again, rattling the shutters with renewed vigor. Fresh snow was falling, I suspected, adding to the already formidable accumulation. The world beyond these walls was growing more hostile by the hour, but in here by the fire, surrounded by people who hours ago had been strangers, there was peace, there was home. Part 4. The night deepens. The common room grew quiet as the hour grew late. One by one, my guests made their way to bed. The Hardins retired first, Margaret leaning heavily on Thomas's arm, Eliza following close behind with the ribbon Josiah had given her mother clutched in her hand as if it were a talisman against the dark. Josiah went next, yawning hugely and declaring that he had not been so warm and well-fed in weeks. He climbed the stairs with the careful tread of a man who has had perhaps 1 cup of wine, too many, though I'd noticed him drink only modestly. Cora lingered longest. She sat by the fire, her lute resting against her thigh, her fingers occasionally plucking a single string and letting the note fade into silence. She seemed lost in thought, her eyes fixed on the flames, and I did not disturb her. There are times when company is welcome, and times when solitude, even solitude shared with others, is what the soul requires. I busied myself with the tasks that fill the end of every evening, banking the fire so it would smolder through the night without going out, sweeping the worst of the crumbs from the floor, washing the dishes in water I had heated over the coals. These rituals have become precious to me. They mark the transition from the busyness of the day to the stillness of the night, and they give my hand something to do while my mind wanders where it will. It was past midnight when Cora finally spoke. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, almost as if she were speaking to herself rather than to me. "Do you ever wonder," she said, "about the people who came before, the ones who walked these roads before there were roads, who lived in these forests before there were settlements?" I paused in my work and considered the question. It was not an idle one, I thought. It had the weight of genuine curiosity, or perhaps genuine concern. "Sometimes," I admitted, "particularly on nights like this, when the world seems very old and very quiet, I think about the ones who were here first, who knew this land in ways we cannot imagine. I wonder what they would think of us, of our inns and our roads, of the way we have reshaped their world." Cora nodded slowly. "I have traveled far," she said. "I have seen places where the old ways are still remembered, where people still speak of the spirits that dwell in the trees and the stones and the water. Here, on the frontier, those voices have grown faint, but they have not disappeared entirely. She reached out and touched the wall of the inn, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood. Can you feel it? The life in this timber, the memory of the forest it came from? Some say that when you cut a tree and use its wood to build, you bring the spirit of that tree into your home. If that is true, then this place is full of spirits. The spirits of the oaks and the pines that your father felled to build these walls. The spirits of the travelers who have passed through and left something of themselves behind. I had not thought of it in quite those terms before, but her words rang true. There was something in the inn that went beyond mere wood and stone, something accumulated over the years of its existence, layered like sediment, building up into something intangible but undeniably present. The first peoples of this land, Cora continued, believed that certain places had power. Crossroads, in particular. They believed that where paths met, the boundaries between worlds grew thin, that spirits could pass through more easily, that the dead could speak to the living, that the future could reach back and touch the present. She turned to look at me, her eyes reflecting the firelight. You built your inn at a crossroads. Whether you knew it or not, you built it on sacred ground. I felt a chill then that had nothing to do with the cold outside. Not fear exactly, but something like awe, a recognition that the world contained more than what I could see and touch and measure. My father chose the location, I said. He never spoke of such things. Perhaps he did not need to. Perhaps he simply knew in the way that some people know without knowing how they know. The rightness of a place, the feeling that here and not elsewhere is where you are meant to be. I thought about my father then, about the quiet certainty with which he had approached the building of the inn. He had never seemed to doubt his decisions. He never wavered in his vision of what this place could become. I had attributed that certainty to his practical nature, his carpenter's confidence in his own abilities. But perhaps there had been something more. Perhaps he had felt the pull of this crossroads and answered it, even if he could not have explained why. Cora rose then, slinging her lute across her back. "Forgive me," she said. "The late hour makes me philosophical. I should sleep." "There is nothing to forgive," I replied. "I appreciate the conversation. And the music." She smiled, a warm expression that softened her sharp features. "You have a gift for hospitality," she said. "This place is special. I have stayed in many inns, and few of them have felt like this. You should be proud." She climbed the stairs, her footsteps light, leaving me alone in the common room, with only the fire for company. I stood for a long time thinking about what she had said, about crossroads and spirits and the thin places where worlds meet, about the accumulated presence of all those who had passed through these doors, about the responsibility of being the keeper of such a place. Outside, the snow continued to fall. I could not see it, but I could feel it, the weight of it pressing down on the world, transforming everything it touched. By morning, the drifts would be higher still, and the roads would be impassable, and anyone not yet under shelter would be in grave danger. I added another log to the fire, watching the flames leap up to embrace it. The wood popped and crackled, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney, and for a moment I could almost imagine that I heard voices in the sound. The spirits of the trees, perhaps, whispering secrets in a language I did not quite understand, or perhaps it was only the fire, doing what fires do. Perhaps Cora's words had simply lodged in my imagination and taken root there, growing into fancies that had no basis in truth. But either way, I found myself speaking aloud, my voice barely above a whisper, addressed to no one and to everyone. "You are welcome here," I said, "all of you, the living and the dead, the remembered and the forgotten. This is a place of rest for whoever needs it." The fire crackled in response, and I chose to believe it was an answer. Part 5. Morning Discoveries. The 25th day of November, I slept poorly, troubled by dreams I cannot quite remember, and woke before dawn to find the world utterly transformed. The snow had finally stopped, but what it left behind was staggering. When I opened the shutters of my chamber, I found myself looking out at a landscape that seemed to belong to another world entirely. The drifts had risen past the windowsills of the common room, and in places they had climbed nearly to the roof. The oak at the crossroads had vanished almost entirely, only its highest branches visible above the white expanse, like the mast of a ship sinking into a frozen sea. The sky was clear for the first time in days, a pale blue that deepened toward the horizon, and the sun, just beginning to rise above the mountains, cast the snow in shades of pink and gold. The beauty of it was almost painful, so bright and clean and perfect that it hurt to look at. But beauty, I've learned, often comes with a price. As I made my way downstairs to begin the morning's work, I heard voices from the common room. My guests were already awake, gathered by the windows, speaking in low, urgent tones. I hurried to join them and saw immediately what had captured their attention. There were figures on the road, or rather, there were figures in what had once been the road. The path itself was no longer visible, buried beneath feet of snow, but the figures were clear enough. 3 dark shapes moving slowly through the white expanse, struggling with every step, their progress painfully, dangerously slow. Josiah was the first to speak. "They'll never make it," he said, his voice grim. "Not through drifts like those. They'll exhaust themselves and freeze before they reach the door." He was right. The snow in the open was waist deep at least, and the figures were moving with the desperate, floundering motion of people who had pushed beyond the limits of their strength. Even as I watched, one of them stumbled and fell, disappearing into the white, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought they would not rise again. But they did. The other 2 figures helped them up, and the 3 of them continued their agonizing march, drawing slowly, impossibly slowly, closer to the inn. "We have to help them," Eliza said, her voice high and tight with alarm. She was right, of course, but how? The snow was too deep for walking, and I had no horse capable of navigating such drifts. The only option was to go out on foot, to wade through the white toward those struggling figures and hope we reached them before the cold claimed them. "Thomas," I said, turning to Mr. Harding, "will you come with me?" He did not hesitate. "Yes," he said, already reaching for his coat. "Josiah, can you build up the fire? Get blankets ready and water heating. They'll need warmth when we bring them in." Josiah nodded, his round face pale but determined, and hurried toward the hearth. Cora was already moving toward the kitchen, presumably to prepare whatever might be needed to revive people half frozen by their ordeal. Margaret Harding gathered Eliza into her arms, holding the girl close, her eyes fixed on the window. Thomas and I pushed open the door and stepped into a different world. The cold was immediate and brutal, cutting through our coats as if they were made of gossamer. The snow came up past my knees from the first step, and each subsequent step was a battle, a struggle to lift my foot free and plant it again, sinking deep, gaining inches where I needed yards. Thomas was beside me, his breath fogging in the frozen air, his face set with determination. We pushed forward. There was no conversation, no energy to spare for words, only the relentless effort of motion. Step, sink, lift, step, sink, lift. The rhythm became everything, blocking out thought, blocking out fear, reducing existence to the simple imperative of movement. The figures drew closer, or we drew closer to them. It was hard to tell which. My world had narrowed to the immediate struggle, to the weight of my legs, to the burning of my lungs, to the cold that gnawed at my exposed skin. But eventually, finally, I looked up and saw them clearly. For the first time, there were 3 of them, as I had thought. 2 men and a woman dressed in clothing that might once have been adequate, but was now sodden and freezing. One of the men was supporting the other, half carrying him through the snow, and the woman was pressing close on his other seat, adding what strength she could. The one being supported was barely conscious, his head lolling, his feet dragging. "Here!" I called, my voice hoarse. "This way, follow us." The 2 who were still capable of response looked up at my voice, and I saw hope kindle in their eyes, desperate, fragile hope, the kind that keeps people moving when all sense says they should have stopped. Thomas reached them up first. He took the unconscious man's other arm, lifting some of the weight from his companions, and together the 5 of us began the slow journey back to the inn. It was easier now, moving through the path we had already broken, but easier was a relative term. The unconscious man was dead weight, and his companions were nearly as spent as he was. The woman stumbled twice, and I caught her arm to keep her upright. "Almost there," I said, though I was not sure if she could hear me. Almost there. The distance that had seemed so vast was finally, mercifully, conquered. We staggered onto the porch of the inn, stomping snow from our boots, and then Josiah was there, holding the door open, and warmth was spilling out to meet us. And we tumbled inside, all 5 of us, collapsing onto the flagstone floor of the common room like survivors of a shipwreck washing up on shore. I learned their names later after we had stripped the wet clothes from them and wrapped them in blankets, after we had poured warm tea down their throats and held them close to the fire. The woman was Sarah, and the 2 men were her brothers, William and James. James was the one who had nearly collapsed, who even now lay closest to the flames, his breathing shallow, his skin still pale with cold. They had been traveling from one of the mountain settlements, Sarah explained, her voice weak but steady. They had stayed too long, hoping the weather would hold, and when the snow came, they had found themselves trapped. They had tried to wait it out in their camp, but when their supplies ran low and the cold grew unbearable, they had decided to risk the journey. It was reach the inn or die trying, and they had nearly died trying. But they had made it. Against all odds, against all reason, they had made it. As I listened to their story, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. There was relief, of course, that they had survived. There was gratitude that we had seen them in time to help. But there was also something else, something harder to name, a sense of the fragility of life, perhaps. A recognition of how close these 3 people had come to vanishing from the world, their stories never told, their lives ended in a wide expanse where no one would find them until spring. The inn had saved them. This place I had inherited from my father, this shelter at the crossroads, had been the difference between life and death. I thought again of Cora's words from the night before about sacred ground and thin places and the spirits that gather where paths meet. I did not know if I believed in such things, but I knew that I believed in the inn itself, in what it represented, in what it could provide, a place of rest, a refuge from the storm, a chance when all hope seemed lost for salvation. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. There was so much to be done, wet clothes to be hung by the fire, warm meals to be prepared, questions to be answered, and reassurances to be given. Sarah proved herself a capable helper despite her exhaustion, insisting on contributing to the work of the inn even as I urged her to rest. Her brothers were less active, William sitting by the fire in a kind of daze while James continued to sleep, his body slowly recovering from the brutal cold that had nearly claimed him. As evening approached, I took stock of my expanded household. Where yesterday I had 5 guests, now I had 8. The private room that the Hardings occupied was large enough for 3, but only just. The common sleeping quarters would need to be rearranged to accommodate Sarah and her brothers, assuming James recovered well enough to be moved from his current position by the fire. Josiah, ever practical, had already begun calculating the impact on our supplies. He produced his ledger, the same one he used to track his merchant's inventory, and began making notes. "We'll need to ration more carefully," he said, though his tone was matter of fact rather than worried. "But we have enough. As long as no more half-frozen travelers appear on your doorstep, we should be fine. And if they do? I asked. He looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. Then we make room, he said simply. That's what you do, isn't it? Make room for whoever needs it. It was not a question, but I answered anyway. Yes, that's what I do. Margaret Harding had taken charge of the cooking, freeing me to attend to the new arrivals. She moved through the kitchen with a competence that spoke of years of practice. Her hands sure and quick as she chopped vegetables and stirred the pot that simmered over the fire. The smell that emerged from that pot was heavenly, rich and savory, speaking of comfort and nourishment. You didn't have to do this, I told her as she ladled stew into bowls. She shook her head. I needed to do something after what we went through, after what those poor souls endured. I needed to feel useful, to contribute something, even if it's just a meal. I understood. There is a particular helplessness that comes from being rescued, from having your survival depend on the kindness of strangers. Doing something, anything, helps restore a sense of agency, of control. Margaret was cooking not just to feed us, but to remind herself that she was capable, that she could act rather than merely be acted upon. We ate together that evening, all 8 of us crowded around the largest table, passing bowls and breaking bread and speaking in the quiet tones of people who have been reminded of their mortality. James had woken briefly, long enough to take some broth, and Sarah had reported that his color was improving. He would live, it seemed. Whatever damage the cold had done, it was not beyond his body's capacity to heal. The conversation was subdued, but not somber. Josiah told stories, as was his way, but he chose lighter tales tonight, humorous anecdotes about the strange things people had asked him to sell, or the odder characters he had encountered on his travels. Cora played softly in the background, melodies without words, a gentle accompaniment to the rhythm of eating and talking. Thomas Harding raised his cup at one point and said simply, "To the inn and to its keeper." The others echoed the toast, and I felt my face warm with something more than the fire's heat. Gratitude, perhaps, or embarrassment, or some complicated mixture of both. I was not accustomed to being toasted. The inn had always been simply there, a fixture of the crossroads taken for granted by those who used it. To be acknowledged, to be thanked, felt strange and unfamiliar. But also, I must admit, good to supper. As the others settled into their evening routines, I stepped outside for a moment of solitude. The air was brutally cold, biting at my exposed skin, but after the warmth of the common room, it was almost refreshing. I stood on the porch and looked out at the wide expanse that surrounded me. The moon had risen nearly full, and its light transformed the snow into something magical. Each drift and dip was illuminated in shades of blue and silver, creating a landscape that seemed to belong to another world entirely. The oak at the crossroads cast a long shadow, its bare branches like fingers reaching toward the sky. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the howl of a wolf, lonely and haunting, and closer by, the hoot of an owl on the hunt. I thought about Sarah and her brothers, about the night they had spent in the open, about the desperate march that had brought them to my door. They had been out there in that beautiful, deadly landscape, fighting for every step, their lives hanging by the thinnest of threads. And now they were inside, warm and fed and safe. The contrast was almost too much to bear. I went back inside and closed the door firmly behind me. Part 6, Recovery and Reflection, the 26th day of November. James remains abed, but he grows stronger by the hour. The color has returned to his face, and his breathing has deepened into the steady rhythm of natural sleep, rather than the shallow gasps of cold-induced stupor. Sarah has barely left his side, keeping vigil in the chair I placed beside the bed, her hand resting on his arm, as if to reassure herself that he is still there, still alive, still warm. William moves between the common room and the chamber, bringing food and drink, checks on his siblings, wearing the slightly dazed expression of someone who cannot quite believe his own survival. The other guests have absorbed these newcomers into our small community with the easy grace that seems to emerge in times of crisis. Josiah has appointed himself the unofficial quartermaster, taking inventory of our supplies and calculating how long we can sustain our current company. His merchant's mind finds comfort in numbers, in the reassuring certainty of quantities measured and recorded. By his reckoning, we have enough food for at least 2 months, possibly longer if we are careful. The root cellar is well stocked, the barrels of ale and cider are full, and there is salt pork and smoked ham and dried fish, enough to see us through. Cora has taken on the role of entertainer, keeping spirits high with songs and stories in the evening hours. She has a seemingly inexhaustible repertoire, drawing from traditions I do not recognize, singing in languages I do not understand. When I asked her where she learned such diverse music, she only smiled and said that a minstrel's trade requires wide wandering and careful listening. Margaret Harding has found purpose in helping me with the cooking and cleaning, the daily work of maintaining the inn. She moves through these tasks with a quiet efficiency that speaks of long practice, and I suspect that in her life before the frontier, she managed a larger household than this one. There is something healing, I think, in the familiarity of domestic work. It grounds her in the present, in the immediate and tangible, and helps keep at bay whatever memories of that terrible night in the cold might otherwise haunt her. Thomas Harding has become my partner in the heavier work, shoveling paths through the snow, hauling wood, checking the integrity of the building against the weight of accumulated white. The drifts have settled somewhat since the storm ended, compacting under their own mass, but they remain formidable obstacles. The path we have cleared from the door to the woodshed looks like a trench dug through a battlefield, its walls rising higher than my head. Young Eliza has attached herself to Cora, following the minstrel like a devoted apprentice. Cora seems not to mind, and I have seen her teaching the girl the fingerings for simple melodies on the lute, guiding her hands with patient instruction. There is life returning to Eliza's eyes, a spark that was nearly extinguished by her ordeal, but that flickers brighter each day. Music, as Cora promised, is helping. As for myself, I find that I have fallen into a new rhythm, one suited to this unexpected winter gathering. I wake before dawn, as always, but now there is more to be done, more fires to feed, more mouths to feed, more hearts to tend. It is exhausting work, but it is also deeply satisfying. The inn has never been so full, and I have never felt so necessary. In the evenings, after supper, we gather by the fire, and stories are told. Each of us has stories to share, chapters from lives that have brought us to this common place. I learn about Joseph's Dallas childhood in a city I have never seen, about the crowded streets and the towering buildings, about the day he decided to leave it all behind and seek his fortune on the road. I learn about the Hardings' courtship, how Thomas and Margaret met at a dance and knew immediately that they were meant for each other, a certainty that has sustained them through years of hardship and loss. Sarah tells us about the mountain settlement she and her brothers left behind, a small community of miners and their families perched precariously on the side of a slope. She speaks of the harsh beauty of the high places, of dawns that paint the peaks in fire, of nights so clear that the stars seem close enough to touch. She speaks also of the dangers, the rock slides and the cave-ins, the accidents that claim lives with brutal regularity. They left, she says, because they wanted more than survival. They wanted a life. The days have settled into a rhythm that feels almost domestic. We wake with the sun such as it is in these short winter days and share a simple breakfast of porridge and bread. The morning hours are devoted to chores, hauling wood, clearing paths, tending to the small herd of chickens I keep in a coop behind the inn. These birds have become surprisingly important to our community, providing eggs that supplement our diet and a sense of normalcy that comes from caring for living creatures. After the midday meal, the afternoon stretches long and quiet. Some of us read, those who are literate and have brought books. Others mend clothes or repair tools or simply sit by the fire, lost in thought. The children, Eliza being the only one among us, usually find ways to entertain herself that puzzle and occasionally alarm the adults. Yesterday, she constructed an elaborate tower from firewood that reached nearly to the ceiling before physics inevitably intervened. The late afternoon brings another round of chores, the feeding of the fire, the preparation of supper. Margaret T. and Sarah have formed an unlikely partnership in the kitchen, two women from vastly different backgrounds discovering a shared language in the alchemy of cooking. Their experiments have grown more ambitious as the winter deepens, producing dishes I could never have imagined on my own. Breads flavored with dried herbs, stews enriched with unexpected combinations of preserved vegetables, even a kind of sweet cake made from the last of our honey and dried apples. then the evenings, the long, dark evenings, when we gather close and share what we have. Stories and chunks, laughter and silence, the simple presence of other human beings, proof against the loneliness that winter can bring. I have noticed changes in my guests as the weeks have passed. Thomas Harding, who arrived with the rigid posture of a man braced against disaster, has begun to relax. I see him smile more often, hear him laugh at Josiah's jokes, watch him play with his daughter in ways that suggest he has finally allowed himself to believe they are safe. Margaret's anxious hovering has subsided into a quieter watchfulness, the vigilance of a mother who knows her family is protected but cannot entirely abandon the habit of fear. Eliza continues to bloom under Cora's tutelage. Her fingers have grown surer on the lute strings, and she has learned half a dozen songs by heart. More than that, though, the music has given her a way to process what she experienced, to transform the terror of that night in the cold into something she can understand and ultimately move beyond. When she plays now, there is a depth to her music that was not there before, a maturity born of suffering survived. Josiah has become the unofficial keeper of our morale. He seems to sense when spirits are flagging, when the weight of winter is pressing too heavily on someone's shoulders, and he intervenes with a well-timed joke or an outrageous story or simply a companionable presence. His cheerfulness could seem forced, even irritating, but there is a genuine warmth behind it, a sincere desire to make others feel better. I have come to appreciate him more than I would have expected. Sarah and her brothers remain somewhat apart from the rest of us, bonded by their shared ordeal in ways that the others cannot fully understand. They speak to each other in glances and half-sentences, a private language developed over a lifetime of siblinghood. But they have also begun to open up, especially Sarah, who has proven herself a thoughtful contributor to our evening conversations. Her perspective on the world is different from the rest of ours, shaped by the harsh realities of mountain life, and she often notices things that the rest of us miss. James has recovered almost completely from his near-fatal exposure. He is on his feet now, contributing to the work of the inn, his strength returning day by day. There is a quietness to him that I suspect was always present, a tendency toward introspection that makes him less visible than his more outgoing siblings. But when he does speak, his words carry weight. He has the manner of someone who has thought carefully before opening his mouth. William is the most enigmatic of the three. He speaks little about himself or his past, deflecting questions with a skill that suggests long practice. But he works hard and without complaint, and he treats the rest of us with a courteous respect that never quite crosses the line into warmth. There is something hidden about him, I think, some secret or sorrow that he keeps locked away. I do not press. We all have parts of ourselves we choose not to share, and Cora, my mysterious minstrel, continues to be exactly what she has always been. Present and compelling and utterly unknowable, she moves through our little community like a thread through fabric, connecting us without ever quite becoming part of the pattern. Her music is the heartbeat of our evenings, her quiet observations often revealing truths we would not have seen on our own. But who she is, where she comes from, what she seeks, these remain mysteries she shows no inclination to solve. These stories weave together in my mind, forming something larger than the sum of their parts. A record not just of individual lives, but of a community born of circumstance, shaped by the shared experience of being stranded together in the snow. We did not choose each other, these guests and I, but we have chosen to care for each other, to share our food and our warmth and our histories. There is a kind of miracle in that, I think, a reminder that human connection can bloom in the most unlikely of soils. The snow continues to lie thick upon the ground, showing no signs of melting. If anything, the temperatures have dropped further, and the nights are bitter beyond imagining. But inside these walls, we are warm. Inside these walls, we are together. And for now, that is enough. Part 7. The Stranger in the Storm. Tum-tum, the first day of December. Something strange happened today. The morning began like any other in this new routine. I woke early, descended to the common room, built up the fire, and began preparing breakfast for my guests. The others emerged gradually, drawn by the smell of cooking and the promise of warmth, and we ate together as the pale winter sun climbed above the mountains. It was mid-morning when Cora looked up from her lute and said simply, "Someone is coming." We all turned to look at her. She was sitting by the window, her instrument resting in her lap, her eyes fixed on some point outside that none of the rest of us could see. "How can you tell?" Josie asked, moving to peer through the frost-rimmed glass. "I don't see anything." "Neither do I," Cora admitted, "but I feel it. Someone is approaching the inn." I have learned in my years as an innkeeper to trust certain intuitions. There are people who seem to sense things before they happen, who feel the ripples in the fabric of the world before those ripples reach ordinary perception. Cora, I had come to believe, was one of these people. Her music alone suggested a sensitivity beyond the ordinary, a connection to currents that most of us never notice. So, rather than dismiss her words, I went to the door and opened it, stepping out onto the porch to look for myself. The day was bright and bitterly cold, the sun reflecting off the snow with blinding intensity. I shielded my eyes with one hand and scanned the horizon, looking for any sign of movement, any dark shape against the endless white. For a long moment, I saw nothing. And then, at the very edge of vision, where the road should be beneath its concealing blanket of snow, I spotted a figure, a single figure walking toward the inn with steady, unhurried steps. Not struggling as the others had struggled, not floundering through drifts, but moving with a strange ease as if the snow presented no obstacle at all. I called the others to the window, and we watched together as the figure approached. It took a long time, the distance being deceiving in the uniform whiteness. But eventually, we could make out details. It was a person, wrapped in a dark cloak, hood pulled up against the cold. They carried no pack that I could see, no supplies, no evidence of the provisions one would need for travel in such conditions. "How is that possible?" Thomas asked, his voice hushed. "The snow out there is waist deep. They're walking on top of it." It did look that way, I realized. The figure's feet did not sink with each step, but seemed to rest lightly on the surface of the snow, leaving tracks that were shallow impressions rather than deep holes. It was uncanny, impossible, and yet there it was, happening before our eyes. The figure reached the inn and stopped at the foot of the porch steps. For a moment they simply stood there, motionless, and I felt the weight of their gaze even though I could not see their face beneath the shadow of the hood. Then they reached up and pushed the hood back, and I saw that it was an old woman. Her face was deeply lined, weathered by years and elements, her hair white as the snow that surrounded us. Her eyes were pale, almost colorless, and they held a quality I can only describe as ancient. Not aged, precisely, but ancient, as if they had seen more years than any human lifetime should contain. "Good morning," she said, and her voice was clear and strong, belying the frailty suggested by her appearance. "I wonder if I might trouble you for shelter." I found my voice with some difficulty. "Of course," I said. "You are welcome here. Please come in." She climbed the steps with that same uncanny lightness and entered the common room. My guests had gathered near the fire, watching with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The old woman seemed not to notice their scrutiny, or perhaps she simply did not care. She moved to the hearth and extended her hands toward the flames, and I saw that her fingers were long and elegant, unmarked by the labor that typically roughens the hands of frontier folk. "Thank you," she said. "The cold does not trouble me as it once did, but warmth is always welcome." I offered her tea, which she accepted, and a seat by the fire, which she also accepted. She sat with a graceful economy of movement, arranging her cloak around her, and took the cup I offered in both hands, holding it close to her face and inhaling the steam. The others remained at a distance, uncertain how to approach this strange visitor. It was Eliza, surprisingly, who broke the silence. "How did you walk on the snow?" she asked, her voice filled with childlike directness. "We watched you from the window. You didn't sink." The old woman smiled, and the expression transformed her face, softening the severe lines, lending warmth to those pale eyes. "An old trick that," she said. "Learned in a place very far from here, a very long time ago. The snow and I have an understanding, you might say." This answer explained nothing, of course, but it was delivered with such matter-of-fact assurance that further questioning seemed somehow impolite. Eliza subsided, still curious but willing to let the mystery remain unsolved. The old woman stayed with us for the rest of the day. She did not speak much of herself or her business, deflecting questions with the practiced ease of someone long accustomed to privacy. But she listened with evident interest to the stories we told. And when Cora played her lute in the evening, the old woman closed her eyes and nodded along to the music, her thin lips moving silently as if she knew the words. It was late when she finally rose to retire. I had prepared a bed for her in one of the common rooms, uncertain whether she would prefer privacy or company, but she waved away my offers of hospitality. "I will not stay the night," she said. "I only stop to rest and to offer a blessing on this house." Before I could respond, she reached into her cloak and withdrew something small, pressing it into my hand. I looked down and saw a candle, white as bone, unlike any candle I had ever seen. It was smooth and cool to the touch, and when I held it to the light, I could see that it was made of wax, so pure it was nearly translucent. "Light this is light. When you have need," she said, "it will burn longer than you expect, and it will not be extinguished by wind or cold. A gift for the keeper of this place." I tried to thank her, to ask her name, to understand who she was and why she had come, but she was already moving toward the door. She paused at the threshold and turned back, and her eyes met mine with an intensity that made my breath catch in my throat. "You have built something special here," she said. "A refuge in the wilderness, a light in the darkness. Do not underestimate its importance. In the days to come, there will be many who need what you offer. Welcome them all." And then she was gone, stepping out into the night, walking across the snow with that impossible lightness, until the darkness swallowed her completely. I stood at the door for a long time, the strange candle clutched in my hand, staring out at the place where she had vanished. My guests gathered behind me, silent, perhaps as bewildered as I was. It was Cora who finally spoke. "Well," she said, her voice thoughtful, "it seems the spirits of the crossroads have taken notice of you." I did not know how to respond to that. I still do not know. But I have placed the candle carefully in my chamber where I can see it as I write these words, and I have resolved to keep it safe until I understand its purpose. The old woman's words echo in my mind. Welcome them all. I will. That much, at least, I can promise. Part 8. The solstice approaches the 15th day of December. The days have grown very short. The sun rises late and sets early, and the hours of darkness stretch interminably, filled with the creak of settling wood and the distant howl of wind. The cold has deepened, if such a thing is possible, and even with the fire burning constantly, there are corners of the inn where frost forms on the inside of the walls. My guests have settled into a rhythm of coexistence that feels almost like family. The Hardings have become fixtures, as familiar to me now as the furniture. Thomas has taken to rising early with me, sharing the morning tasks, and I have come to rely on his steady presence. Margaret has transformed the kitchen with her organizational skills, instituting a system of rotation for the cooking and cleaning that ensures no one is overburdened. Eliza spends most of her time with Cora, practicing the lute, and her progress has been remarkable. She has a natural gift, the minstrel says, an ear for music that cannot be taught. Josiah continues to manage our supplies with meticulous care, producing daily reports on our consumption and projections for how long our stores will last. By his calculations, we are in no danger of running short, even if the winter stretches longer than expected. His reports have become a sort of ritual, delivered each evening after supper with a solemnity that suggests he takes his self-appointed role very seriously indeed. The Mountain's siblings have fully recovered from their ordeal. Sarah has proven herself an excellent cook, contributing dishes from her homeland that none of us had tasted before, rich stews flavored with herbs I did not recognize, bread baked with a particular technique that produces an extraordinarily dense and satisfying loaf. William and James have joined Thomas in the heavy work, forming a crew that keeps the paths clear and the woodpile well stocked. They work well together, these men from such different places and circumstances, united by the simple necessity of survival. And Cora remains Cora, mysterious and magnetic, filling the evenings with music and the days with her quiet observations. She has become something like the heart of our little community, the one around whom we gather, the one who reminds us that life can be beautiful even when it is hard. The winter solstice approaches, and with it, a decision must be made. In the settlements I have heard of, the solstice is marked with celebration, with feasting and music and the lighting of candles to defy the longest night of the year. I have never hosted such a celebration at the inn, having usually been alone at this time of year, but it seems fitting that this winter should be different. I proposed the idea at supper last night, and the response was immediate and enthusiastic. Margaret clapped her hands and begged, listing the dishes she could prepare. Josiah calculated whether our stores could support a feast and declared that they could with careful management. Thomas offered to cut additional wood so we could build a fire higher than usual. Sarah and her brothers volunteered to help with whatever preparations were needed. Eliza's eyes shone with excitement, and she asked Cora if they could perform a song together for the occasion. Only Cora seemed hesitant. When I asked her what was wrong, she was quiet for a long moment before answering. "The solstice is a powerful time," she said at last. "The boundary between years, the point of balance between darkness and light. In the old traditions, it was a night when anything might happen, when the veil between worlds grew thin, and those who knew how to look could see what others could not." She paused, her eyes distant, as if seeing something beyond the walls of the inn. "I do not say this to discourage celebration," she continued, "only to suggest that we should approach the night with awareness, with respect for what it represents. Light your candles and feast and make merry, yes, But remember also to leave a candle burning in the window to guide those who wander in the dark, and perhaps to set aside a portion of your feast as an offering for those who might be watching from the other side. Her words cast a shadow over the table, but it was not an unwelcome shadow. It felt right somehow to acknowledge the significance of what we were planning. This was not just a party to break the monotony of winter. It was a marking of time, a recognition of the turning point around which the year revolves. "We will do as you suggest," I said, "a candle in the window and an offering set aside, and the celebration will be all the richer for it." Cora smiled then, that warm expression that transformed her sharp features. "Good," she said. "Then I will gladly perform, and we will welcome the returning light together." The preparations began today. Margaret and Sarah have taken over the kitchen, consulting lists of ingredients and comparing recipes, their voices rising and falling in animated discussion. Thomas and the brothers are building a great pile of wood, enough to keep the fire roaring through the entire night if need be. Josiah has produced candles from somewhere in his merchant's pack, a gift, he says, for the occasion, dozens of them in various sizes and colors. And I have retrieved the strange white candle the old woman gave me, the one she said would burn longer than expected. I do not know if I should use it for the solstice or save it for some future need, but I have placed it on the mantel above the fire, where its pale form seems to glow with an inner light even unlit. 5 days until the solstice, 5 days until the longest night. I find myself looking forward to it with an anticipation I have not felt in years. The preparations have taken on a festive quality that transforms the daily work of the inn into something almost celebratory. Margaret has begun experimenting with spices from Josiah's pack, discovering combinations that fill the kitchen with aromas of cinnamon and cloves and nutmeg, scents that speak of warmth and celebration even before the food reaches the table. Sarah has contributed recipes from her mountain home, traditional dishes meant to mark the turning of the year, some of which require ingredients we do not have, but which she adapts with creativity and good humor. Thomas and his crew have constructed something they call a solstice arch from evergreen branches gathered from the forest edge, now buried but still accessible with some determined digging. The arch frames the entrance to the common room, filling the air with the sharp, clean scent of pine. When I pass through it, I feel as though I am crossing a threshold into something special, leaving the ordinary behind. Eliza has thrown herself into the preparations with all the enthusiasm of youth. She has appointed herself the decorator of candles, wrapping ribbons around them, affixing sprigs of dried herbs, transforming ordinary tallow into objects of surprising beauty. Josiah has contributed some of his colored ribbons to her efforts, and the results are genuinely impressive. The common room, when the candles are lit, will look like something from a dream, even James. The quietest of the mountain siblings has contributed. He has spent hours carving small wooden figures, animals, and birds and abstract shapes that he places round the room without comment. When I asked him about them, he simply shrugged and said that his mother had always done something similar, that it would not feel like solstice without small things to discover in unexpected corners. I find his figures throughout the inn now. A tiny owl perched on a windowsill, a miniature deer standing guard on a shelf, a spiral of wood that might be a flame or might be a question mark resting beside my journal. Cora has been composing. She sits in her corner, her lute across her lap, her fingers picking out melodies, her voice humming fragments of song. Sometimes she calls Eliza over to try a harmony, their two voices weaving together in patterns that make my heart ache with a strange, sweet sadness. The music she is creating for the solstice is unlike anything she has played before, deeper and more complex, as if she is reaching for something beyond the ordinary boundaries of song. I have my own preparations. The white candle sits on my desk as I write, waiting for its moment. I do not know when I will light it or what will happen when I do, but I feel certain that the solstice is the right time. The old woman spoke of need, and I think I understand now what she meant. Not physical need, not hunger or cold or danger, but something deeper. The need to mark significance. The need to acknowledge the turning of the world. The inn feels different in these days, leading up to the longest night. There is an electricity in the air, an anticipation that seems to emanate from the walls themselves. Even the fire burns differently, I think, its flames dancing with a particular liveliness, as if it too is preparing for something. The shadows in the corners seem deeper, more pregnant with possibility. And when I wake in the night, as I often do, I sometimes hear sounds that I cannot explain. Whispers, perhaps, or the rustle of movement, or simply the settling of an old building in the cold. But they feel significant in a way that ordinary sounds do not. 4 days. Now, the preparations continue. Part 9, the longest night, the 21st day of December. The solstice has come, and with it, a night I will never forget. I should begin at the beginning, though the beginning itself seems difficult to identify. Perhaps it began with the preparations, the careful cooking and the arrangement of tables, the lighting of candles throughout the common room until the space glowed with a warm radiance that pushed back against the encroaching dark. Perhaps it began with the gathering of my guests around the largest table, their faces bright with anticipation, their voices lifted in conversation and laughter. Or perhaps it began earlier still, with the old woman's visit, with the gift of the strange white candle, with Cora's words about the thinness of boundaries on this particular night. Wherever it began, the evening unfolded with a magic that seemed to exceed the sum of its parts. The feast was magnificent. Margaret and Sarah had outdone themselves, producing dishes that ranged from the simple and hearty to the surprisingly sophisticated. There was a roasted joint of pork, glazed with honey and studded with cloves, its fat rendered to a golden crispness. There was bread in 4 varieties, including the dense loaves that Sarah had taught us to make, still warm from the oven, and fragrant with yeast. There were root vegetables roasted with herbs, their edges caramelized, their centers soft and sweet. There was a soup made from dried peas and ham bones, rich and thick and deeply satisfying. And for dessert, there was a pudding that Margaret had been secretly preparing for days, heavy with dried fruit and spices, served with a sauce made from the last of our precious sugar. We ate until we could eat no more, and then we ate a little more. Wine flowed freely, and conversation grew animated, and laughter rang off the rafters. Josiah told stories of the city he had left behind, painting pictures with words of places none of us had ever seen. Thomas recounted tales from his younger days. Adventures undertaken before marriage and fatherhood had taught him caution. Sarah sang a song from her mountain home, a haunting melody about lost love and endless winter, and even though we did not know the words, we hummed along. As the hour grew late, Cora rose and took up her lute. The room fell silent, the conversation dying away as all eyes turned to her. She stood by the fire, the flames casting her face in shifting patterns of light and shadow, and she began to play. The song she chose was one I had not heard before. It was old, she told us later, older than any of us could guess, passed down through generations of minstrels who traveled the roads of this land before the roads had names. It was a song about the solstice, about the longest night, about the darkness that seems as if it will never end, and the light that returns despite all fear. Her voice rose and fell, carrying the melody with an effortless grace that made it seem less like performance than like breathing. The words were in a language I did not recognize, but their meaning was somehow clear nonetheless. They spoke of hope in the midst of despair, of warmth in the depths of cold, of the promise that dawn would always follow night, no matter how long that night might be. As she sang, something strange began to happen. The candles, all the dozens of them scattered throughout the room, began to burn brighter. Not gradually, not subtly, but distinctly, visibly brighter, their flames stretching upward as if reaching for something beyond the ceiling. The fire in the hearth roared higher, though no one had added wood, its heat intensifying until the room felt almost tropically warm. And the white candle on the mantel, the one the old woman had given me, burst into flame of its own accord, its light so pure and clear that it seemed to illuminate not just the room, but as something beyond the room, something I could sense but not quite see. I looked around at my guests and saw wonder on every face. Eliza had taken Cora's hand. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and delight. Margaret was weeping, though she did not seem sad. Thomas and William and James stood frozen, their attention fixed on the transformed candles. Josiah had removed his spectacles and was cleaning them obsessively, as if he suspected they were malfunctioning. And then through the window I saw them. Figures in the snow, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, standing silent and motionless in the wide expanse beyond the inn. They were indistinct, their forms blurry and shifting, and yet I could sense them with a certainty that went beyond sight. They were watching us. They had been drawn to our celebration, to our feast and our music and our candles. And they stood now at the threshold between their world and ours. I should have been afraid. Perhaps I was afraid somewhere beneath the shock and wonder, but I remembered the old woman's words, welcome them all, and I remembered Cora's instruction, leave a portion as an offering. I rose from my seat, moving as if in a dream, and went to the table where the remnants of our feast still sat. I gathered food onto a plate, bread and meat, and a generous serving of the pudding, and I carried it to the door. The others watched in silence as I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. The cold should have been brutal, but I did not feel it. The figures in the snow should have been terrifying, but they were not. They were simply present, waiting. I set the plate down on the porch railing and stepped back. For those who wander in the dark, I said, my voice steady despite everything. For those who watch from the other side, you are welcome here. This place is a refuge for all who need it. For a long moment, nothing happened. The figures remained motionless. The snow lay still. The wind held its breath. And then, slowly, the figures began to fade. One by one, they dissolved into the darkness, vanishing like mist under the morning sun. Until the white expanse was empty once more, I turned and went back inside, closing the door behind me. The candles had returned to normal. The fire had subsided to its usual roar. The white candle on the mantel still burned, but with a gentle, natural light. My guests were staring at me with expressions I could not read. What, Josiah said carefully, was that? I did not have an answer. I do not have an answer now, hours later, as I sit in my chamber and record this night in my journal. I only know that something happened, something beyond explanation, something that felt important and right and necessary. Cora caught my eye across the room and nodded once with an expression of approval. The boundaries are thin tonight, she said quietly, and you chose to be welcoming rather than afraid. That matters. That matters more than you know. The rest of the night passed in a kind of haze. We did not speak much of what had happened, but we sat together until the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the window. We had witnessed the longest night, and we had come through it together, and the returning sun felt like a blessing earned rather than a gift given. Today, the world seems ordinary again. The snow lies thick upon the ground. The cold bites at any exposed skin. The work of survival continues. But something has changed, something I cannot name, but can definitely feel. The inn is more than a building now. It is a place of power, a refuge recognized by forces I do not understand, a crossroads in more than just the geographical sense. I am its keeper, and I will welcome them all. Part 10. new year, new beginnings. The first day of January in the year of our settlement's 13th winter. A new year has begun. The celebrations were more subdued than the solstice, but no less meaningful. We gathered at midnight to mark the turning of the calendar, raising cups of mulled cider to toast the year that has ended and the year that has begun. There were no strange visitations, no supernatural occurrences, just the warmth of the fire and the company of people who have become, against all expectations, something like family. The snow shows no signs of relenting. If anything, it has grown deeper in the weeks since the solstice, fresh falls adding to the already formidable accumulation. The roads remain impassable, and the world beyond the inn has shrunk to a distant memory. We exist now in a self-contained bubble, a pocket of warmth and light in the midst of an endless white void. And yet, somehow, this does not feel like imprisonment. It feels like rest. I think, perhaps, that is what winter is for. The land sleeps beneath its blanket of snow, gathering strength for the explosion of growth that spring will bring. The creatures of the forest burrow deep, conserving energy, waiting for the moment when the sun returns in earnest. And we, the inhabitants of this inn, have done something similar. We have turned inward, focusing on the warmth we can create together, strengthening bonds that will serve us when the world opens up once more. The Hardings have made a decision. They will not continue to the mountains when the snow melts. Thomas's brother will understand, Margaret says, and perhaps they will make the journey another year. But for now, for this year, they wish to stay. There is land available near the inn, land that could be claimed and cleared and fenced. Thomas has the skills to build a cabin, and Margaret has the determination to make it a home. Eliza has dreams of continuing her music lessons with Cora, of perhaps one day becoming a minstrel herself. I have told them they are welcome, more than welcome, in truth. The thought of neighbors, of friends who live within walking distance fills me with a warmth that rivals the fire in the hearth. Josiah will leave when the roads clear. His merchant soul cannot rest long in one place, and there are settlements that have not seen his ribbons and mirrors, towns where his stories have not yet been told. But he has promised to return, to make the inn a regular stop on his circuit, and I find that I am already looking forward to his visits. Sarah and her brothers are also bound for distant places, though they have been less specific about their destination. There is something they seek, they say, something that calls them onward, and they must follow that call when the world permits travel once more. But they too have promised to return, or to send word if they cannot, and I believe them. The bond forged in a blizzard is not easily broken. Cora remains enigmatic about her plans. She speaks of the road with a wistfulness that suggests she will take it again sooner or later, but she has made no specific commitments. Perhaps she will stay through the spring. Perhaps she will leave tomorrow with Cora, one never quite knows, and I have learned not to press. She will do as her spirit guides her, and I will be grateful for whatever time she chooses to spend here. As for myself, I will remain where I am, where I have always been, since my father built this place and passed its keeping to me. The inn is my home, my purpose, my identity. It is the canvas on which my life is painted, and every traveler who passes through adds a new stroke of color. Looking back on the entries I have made in this journal, I am struck by how much has happened in such a short time. A little over a month ago, I sat in this same chamber and recorded my decision to begin writing. I had no idea then what the winter would bring. The first snow, the stranded travelers, the strange visitor who walked upon the snow, the solstice and its mysteries, the deepening of bonds that I had not known I needed. I started this journal because I wanted to remember the travelers who passed through. I wanted to capture something of their stories, to preserve the impressions they leave behind. But I find that I have captured something else as well. I have captured myself, my thoughts and fears and hopes, my reflections on what it means to be the keeper of a crossroads. The white candle still sits on my mantle, burning with that slow, steady flame the old woman promised. It has been lit since the solstice and shows no sign of exhausting itself. I do not know how long it will burn. I do not know what it will summon when it finally gutters out. But I have come to think of it as a symbol, a reminder of the responsibilities I have accepted, to be a light in the darkness, to welcome all who wander, to keep the fire burning no matter how cold the night. These are simple duties, but they are not small ones. In a world that can be harsh and unforgiving, a place of warmth and welcome is no small thing. The inn may be humble, may be far from the centers of power and wealth, may be unknown to all but those who happen to pass this way. But for those travelers, for those who arrive exhausted and cold and desperate, it is everything. I will not forget that. I will not take it for granted, and I will continue to write in this journal, recording the stories of those who come, preserving the moments that matter, bearing witness to the ordinary magic of human connection. The days following the solstice have been quieter, more reflective. The intensity of the longest night has given way to a gentle calm, as if the world itself needed time to process what had occurred. We speak less of what we saw and more of everyday things, but there is a new quality to our interactions, a depth that was not there before. We have shared something profound, something that binds us together in ways that ordinary companionship cannot. The weather has moderated slightly, if bitter cold can be said to moderate. The temperatures remain well below freezing, but the murderous intensity of the solstice week has passed. The sun What little of it we see seems fractionally warmer, fractionally brighter. The days are lengthening minute by minute, a change imperceptible to casual observation, but undeniably real. We have turned the corner. The darkness is retreating. I find myself thinking often about the figures I saw in the snow that night. Were they real? Were they spirits, ghosts, something else entirely? In the clear light of day, the memory feels dreamlike, insubstantial, easy to dismiss as a product of excitement and firelight, and perhaps one too many cups of mulled cider. But when night falls and I sit alone in my chamber, writing by the light of the white candle that still burns, I know what I saw. I know what I felt. The boundary between worlds was thin that night, and something looked through. Cora speaks of it rarely, and when she does, it is oblique, couched in the language of folklore and metaphor. She tells stories about the wild hunt, about processions of spirits that ride across the sky on winter nights, about the old ones who dwell in the spaces between the seen and the unseen. She does not say directly that these stories explain what we witnessed, but the implication is clear. There are more things in this world than our daily experience acknowledges, and on certain nights, in certain places, those things make themselves known. The others seem content not to dwell on the matter. The Hardings, practical people to their core, have filed the experience away as one of those unexplainable events that sometimes happen and are best examined too closely. Josiah, despite his storyteller's imagination, has adopted a similar approach, though I catch him sometimes staring at the white candle with an expression of bewilderment. Sarah and her brothers exchanged significant glances when we first discussed the night's events, and I sensed they know more than they are saying, but they have not volunteered information, and I have not pressed. What matters, perhaps, is not what the experience was, but what it meant. And what it meant, I have come to believe, is that this place is special. That the inn at the crossroads is not merely a building, but a node, a gathering point, a place where the ordinary and extraordinary touch. My father built it because the location felt right, and now I understand why. The crossroads themselves are significant, imbued with a power that predates human settlement, that will outlast any structure we might build. The inn is simply the current expression of that power, the current vessel for whatever purpose the crossroads serve. I am the keeper of that vessel. It is a responsibility I must take seriously. The New Year's celebrations were simple but meaningful. We gathered at midnight, counted down the final moments of the old year, and greeted the new one with cheers and embraces. There were no supernatural occurrences, no visitations, no thinning of boundaries. Just humans marking the passage of time, firming our existence and our connections to each other. But when I stepped outside to look at the stars, I felt something, a presence perhaps, or simply an awareness. The world was watching, as it always is, and it had taken notice of what we were building here, a community, a refuge, a light in the darkness. I stood under that watching sky and made a silent promise to tend this place with care, to welcome all who came seeking shelter, to maintain the fire, both literal and figurative, that makes this crossroads a beacon for those who travel in the night. The stars seemed to sparkle their approval, and I went back inside feeling strangely at peace. Part 11. The thaw begins. The 15th day of March. The world is stirring. I woke this morning to a sound I had not heard in months, the drip of water, melting snow running off the roof, pattering against the stones of the porch. I lay in my bed beneath the sloping ceiling and listened to it, that simple percussion, and I felt something loosen in my chest, an easing of a tension I had not known I was carrying. The thaw has begun. The changes have been gradual, so gradual that they're easy to miss if you're not paying attention. The days have grown longer, the sun climbing higher in the sky, lingering later before surrendering to night. The drifts that seemed eternal have begun to shrink, their surfaces pockmarked with the pits of melting, their edges receding inch by inch. The road, that buried ribbon of connections to the outside world, has started to emerge in patches. Dark earth showing through the white like land rising from a receding flood. I stood at the window this morning and watched the transformation, feeling something between relief and melancholy. Relief, certainly, at the prospect of the world opening up again, of the isolation ending, of new travelers arriving with news and stories from beyond the horizon. But melancholy, too, because the end of winter means the end of this particular gathering, this unlikely family that formed in the crucible of snow and cold. We have lived together now for months, these guests and I. We have shared meals and stories and silences. We have celebrated the solstice and the new year and the countless small victories of survival. We have nursed the sick and warmed the cold and welcomed the stranger. And in doing so, we have become something more than host and guests, more than strangers brought together by circumstance. But its circumstances change. The snow melts. The roads clear, and those who came seeking temporary shelter will go seeking permanent homes. My guests have grown restless. After months of enforced confinement, the prospect of open roads calls to them with an almost physical force. Josiah has begun reorganizing his packs, taking inventory of his goods, calculating route and distances. He speaks of the settlements to the south, of the markets that await his wares, of the faces of customers he has not seen since autumn. His merchant's heart beats faster with each degree the temperature rises. Sarah and her brothers are also preparing to leave. They have spent the winter in consultation, speaking in low voices by the fire, poring over maps that William produced from somewhere in their belongings. Their destination remains unclear to me, but their determination is unmistakable. Whatever they seek, wherever it lies, they will pursue it as soon as the roads permit. And Cora, mysterious Cora, has announced that she too will be moving on. The road calls her, she says, with a minstrel's poetic vagueness. There are songs to be sung in places she has not yet visited, stories to be gathered from people she has not yet met. She will go where the music leads her, and she will not be tied to any single place, no matter how welcoming. I understand. I have always understood that the inn is a pause in people's journeys, not a destination. They come here to rest, to recover, to gather strength, and then they move on. That is the nature of hospitality, and to expect otherwise would be to misunderstand the role I play. But understanding does not preclude sadness. I will miss them, these strangers who became companions, these travelers who became friends. The common room will feel empty without Josiah's stories, without Sarah's cooking, without Kokora's music. The work of maintaining the inn will feel heavier without Thomas and William and James to share the burden. The quiet of the evenings will feel deeper without young Liza's laughter. The Hardings, at least, will remain. They have chosen to build their lives here, to become neighbors rather than guests, and their presence will be a comfort in the months ahead. Already, Thomas has begun clearing land for their cabin, taking advantage of the softening ground to cut trees and prepare the site. Margaret has been planning a garden, sketching layouts, and making lists of seeds she will need. Eliza continues her music lessons with Cora, determined to learn as much as she can before her teacher departs. A community is forming around the inn. Not just the Hardings, but others as well. Word is spread somehow of this place at the crossroads, this refuge in the wilderness. 2 families have already passed through, heading for the mountains, but stopping to inquire about available land. A tradesman has asked if I would be interested in a business arrangement supplying the inn with goods in exchange for lodging. A preacher has expressed interest in holding services here for any who might wish to worship in a proper gathering rather than the isolation of their homesteads. The frontier is being tamed slowly but surely, and the inn stands at the center of the process. Not because of anything I have done, but because of what this place represents. A fixed point in a landscape of change, a beacon for those who seek shelter, a crossroads where paths converge and diverge, where strangers meet and sometimes become friends. My father would be proud, I think. He built this place with his own hands, dreaming of exactly this future. And though he did not live to see it, his dream is coming true. The inn is becoming what he always intended, the heart of a community, the anchor around which lives are built. As I write these words, I can hear voices from the common room below. My guests are gathered by the fire, sharing a final evening together before the departures begin. Someone is laughing. Someone is playing a melody on the lute. The smell of cooking drifts up through the floorboards, rich and savory and full of promise. I will close this journal entry now and go down to join them. The thaw has begun and a new season awaits, and there is much to celebrate before we say goodbye. But I will be back. I will continue to write, to record, to remember. The journal that began as an experiment has become a necessity. It is my way of honoring the travelers who pass through, of acknowledging that their stories matter, of preserving some trace of the lives that have intersected with mine. The white candle still burns. The fire still roars. The inn still stands. And I am still here, welcoming them all. Part 12. The road goes ever on. The first day of April, they are gone. Josiah left at first light, his pack horse laden with goods, his pockets full of the coins he earned trading with my other guests over the winter. He shook my hand at the door, his grip firm, warm, and he promised to return in the autumn, to winter here again if I would have him. I told him he would always be welcome, and I meant it. Sarah, William, and James departed shortly after, heading west toward whatever mystery calls them. Sarah embraced me before she left, a fierce hug that spoke more than words could. "You saved us," she said quietly. "That night in the snow, you saved our lives. We won't forget." Then they were gone, three figures dwindling into the distance, following a road that had finally emerged from its winter burial. Cora was the last to leave. She waited until the afternoon, until the sun was high and the air was warm enough that travel would be pleasant rather than merely possible. She played one final song for us, for me and the Hardings, a melody of farewell and promise. And when she finished, she set her lute across her back and walked out the door without looking back. But she left something behind. On my pillow that night, I found a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a ring, simple silver, engraved with symbols I did not recognize. There was also a note, written in Cora's elegant hand. "For the keeper of the crossroads, wear this, and you will always find your way home, no matter how far you wander, though I suspect you will never wander far from where you belong until we meet again. See, I wear the ring now as I write these words. It fits perfectly, as if it was made from my finger. I do not know what magic it might hold, or if it holds any magic at all. But it is a reminder of her, of the winter we shared, of the music that filled this room. When everything outside was cold and dark, the inn is quiet now. After months of company, the solitude feels strange, almost oppressive. The common room is too large for just me and the occasional visitor. The fire burns for no one but myself. The food I prepare is more than I can eat, forcing me to reduce my recipes, to cook smaller portions, to acknowledge that I'm alone once more. But I am not entirely alone. The Hardings are building their cabin on the ridge above the inn, close enough that I can see the smoke from their fire on clear days. Thomas stops by frequently, checking on me, helping with repairs, sharing news from the wider world that filters in through the trickle of travelers who pass this way. Margaret brings food, more than I need, and we eat together sometimes. The three of us, plus Eliza, almost like a family. Other visitors have come as well. A group of miners heading for the mountains who stayed for 2 nights and paid generously for the privilege. A family relocating from the coast with children who ran shrieking through the common room while their exhausted parents slumped by the fire, a messenger carrying dispatches for the governor, who did not stay, but who accepted a meal and left a coin far larger than the food was worth. The inn is not empty. It never will be, I think, not entirely. People need places to rest, and this place will always be here to serve that need. But the winter gathering was special. I know that now, with the clarity of distance. Those particular people, in that particular time, created something that cannot be replicated. We were thrown together by circumstance, stranded by snow, and we made of our stranding something beautiful. We built a community that lasted until the roads opened, and then we scattered like seeds on the wind, carrying pieces of each other to new destinations. I think about them often. I wonder where Josiah is now, what settlements he has visited, what stories he is telling around unfamiliar fires. I wonder about Sarah and her brothers, whether they have found what they seek, whether their journey has led them to answers or only to more questions. I wonder about Cora most of all, that wandering minstrel with the ancient eyes, whose music seemed to call things from beyond the veil of the ordinary. Will I see them again? Perhaps. Josiah promised to return, and I believe him. Sarah and her siblings may circle back someday, drawn by memory or need. Cora is harder to predict, but I have learned that roads have a way of bringing people back to places where they are meant to be. And if they do not return, that is all right too. They have left their mark on this place, their impression in the wood and stone, their echoes in the silence of the common room. I carry them with me in my journal, in the entries that document our time together, in the stories that I will tell to future travelers who ask about the winter that was. The white candle continues to burn. It has been lit since the solstice, over 3 months now, and it has not diminished by even a fraction of an inch. Whatever magic the old woman put into it, whatever power it holds, it seems endless. Sometimes I sit and watch it, mesmerized by the steady flame, and I think about her words. Light this when you have need. Perhaps I always have need. Perhaps the candle senses that and burns accordingly. Or perhaps it is simply a candle, a physical object obeying physical laws I do not understand. I have learned this winter that not all mysteries require solutions. Some are better left as mysteries, their beauty preserved by uncertainty. The sun is setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The snow has mostly melted, leaving behind muddy paths and the first tentative shoots of green emerging from the thawing earth. Spring is here, truly here, and with it comes the promise of new beginnings. I will close this journal entry now, the final entry in what has become a chronicle of an extraordinary winter. But I will not stop writing. Tomorrow, or the day after, or sometime soon, I will begin a new volume, and I will continue to record the stories of those who passed through. The inn will stand, the fire will burn, the candle will glow in its window, guiding travelers through the dark. And I will be here, the keeper of the crossroads, welcoming them all.
And so, dear listener, We come to the end of this first journey together. You have heard the innkeeper's voice, speaking across the years, sharing memories of a winter that shaped everything that came after. You have met the travelers who found shelter in that remote place. The Hardings, fleeing toward a new life. Josiah the merchant with his ribbons and stories. Cora the minstrel, whose music seemed to summon something from beyond the ordinary. Sarah and her brothers, survivors of a storm that nearly claimed their lives. And the mysterious old woman who walked upon the snow and left behind a gift of light. The inn still stands, in a manner of speaking, the crossroads still exists, and the story, as stories do, continues. But for now, the candle has burned low and the hour has grown late, and it is time for rest. Whatever burdens you carry, whatever distances you have traveled to reach this moment, know that you are welcome here. Set down your pack, warm yourself by the fire. Let the quiet settle around you like a blanket. Tomorrow the road will be waiting. Tomorrow there will be journeys to continue and destinations to reach. But tonight, you are safe. Tonight you are not alone. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing this time with me. And if you have found something of value in these words, something that brought you comfort or peace or simply a respite from the clamor of the waking world, then I ask only one small thing in return. Remember this place. Remember that it exists, this inn at the crossroads, this refuge in the wilderness. And when you encounter others who seem lost, who seem to need a pause in their own journeys, perhaps you might mention it. Perhaps you might send them this way. There is always room at the inn. There is always warmth by the fire, and the keeper of this place, whoever they may be, will welcome them all. Until we meet again. Good night.